Hello and welcome to the next YouTube video on my channel. Based on the fact that I'm right now spending a holiday trip at the Gardasee, guess which topic this video is about? Correct, it's about the very famous Italian game. So as you have just seen, I've been on a vacation trip at the Gardasee in Italy. Therefore, I decided to make a YouTube video in which I don't only show and explain you the Italian game and chess, but also tell you a bit about the history of it. So let's not waste time and get started. The Italian game starts pretty classical with pawns to e4 and e5. Now we attack black's pawn on e5 with knight to f3, and our opponent defends, then our take pawn with the development of his knight on c6. And the main, or also called the key move of the Italian opening, is the development of the king's bishop now here on c4. This move leads into many different continuation variations and sidelines of the Italian game, like for example into the Garacopiano after bishop to b5, or also into the two knights defense after knight to f. The Italian game is one of the most famous and also one of the oldest openings in the game of chess. It was named after the Italian chess player Gioacchino Greco. He was one of the most meaningful and strongest chess players from the 17th century, but actually the first main, also called the key moves of the Italian game, have been already mentioned in the 15th century, like for example in the manuscript of Göttingen. But before I'll show and start with showing you the first continuation variation of the Italian game, I would like to ask you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, because I'm really trying to reach the monetization with 1000 subscribers right now, so I'll be able to produce more chess videos for you and for my community, and that I'll be able to increase the quality of them. Thank you. In most of the cases, the game after the third move continues with pawn to c3, so at first bishop to c5, and now pawn to c3, the main line of the Garacopiano. Black continues with developing a second knight now on f6, also taking our pawn here on e4. And therefore we can either defend this pawn now with pawn to d3, this is called the Garacopianissimo variation, translated into English, the very calm game, or we start launching a center attack in the center of the chessboard with a pawn, with not pawn to d3, but rather pawn to d4. How I've already said, this is called the center attack, and yes, often the game continues now with a pawn trade, like this. Black captures our pawn, we capture back black's pawn, and they continue with bishop to b4 with check. This is still the main line of this Garacopiano variation. And now there are three different options how to block this b4 check now. The first one is an obvious and pretty natural developing and also defending move, bishop to d2. Black can now either trade bishops here and then start launching an attack with pawn to d5, or they instantly capture our now undefended pawn here on e4, on which there is a very nice and interesting sideline after bishop captures pawn on f7 with check. This is just a completely clean bishop sacrifice, and this is playable because after black has captured back our bishop on the f7, we can just play queen to b3, crazy check move and fork, because after the king has escaped or black has somehow blocked the check with, for example, pawn to d5, we can win back this bishop here, and therefore this variation or sideline of the Garacopiano game is playable. The second and third option how to block this check in this position is to play either knight to d2 again or knight to c3. Both of these variations are called the Garaco Gambit, because here in this position, and in comparison to the other one where we have defended this check with bishop to d2, we can't win back the pawn anymore after our opponent has captured our e4 pawn with his f6 knight. So here we can't capture back the pawn, but we still continue with the short castling, so we accept having one pawn less than our opponent, but we gain a positional advantage and also an advantage in the development of chess pieces. And now I'll show you the already named Garacopianissimo variation of the Garacopiano with pawn to d3 on the fourth move. So with choosing the Garacopianissimo, white aims for a slow developing and preparation of the d4 move. Here, by avoiding an immediate confrontation in the center of the chessboard, white prevents the early release of tension through exchanges and enters the positional maneuvering game. So black in most of the cases on pawn to d3, the key or also called the main move, answers again with knight to f6. And here there are really lots of different continuation variations now. For example, we could just play pretty passively pawn to h3. We could also do the short castling here, bringing the rook in the center of the chessboard, probably playing rook to e1 in the future. The king is now safe here in the corner of the chessboard behind this pawn wall, but you could actually also just again play pawn to c3 and translate back into the Garacopianissimo variation of the Garacopiano. And now I would like to continue with two very interesting but a bit less famous gambits in the Italian game, starting with the Evidence Gambit. I've actually made a full YouTube video about the very interesting Evidence Gambit, so feel free to check it out in the video description after you have finished this video. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel to not miss anything new. The Evidence Gambit goes after the crazy move pawn to b4 on the fourth move of the Italian game. We just completely sacrifice our b pawn to the bishop. So our opponent obviously has two options. He either accepts the gambit or he declines it, like it is in every chess gambit. If he accepts it, then he obviously captures our pawn now on b4, on which we would continue with pawn to c3, followed by pawn to d4, again launching all of our pawns here in the center of the chessboard and completely occupying it. And the second option is obviously, how I've already said, not to accept the gambit, so not to take out our pawn here on b4, but rather to escape with the bishop. And here he can escape now on b6. The idea of the Evidence Gambit is to sacrifice an unimportant pawn with the idea to gain positional advantages already in the beginning of the chess game. But of course, black could also decline it and escape with the bishop on b6. Here we can continue attacking with, for example, pawn to e4 with the idea to play pawn to a5 in the following move, trying to win and trap this bishop here, this kingside bishop and black square bishop of the black army. The second gambit which I would like to show you in this video is the Italian Gambit, named after the Italian game. On move 4 we again sacrifice one of our pawns, but this time not the b pawn by moving it on b4 with the Evidence Gambit, but rather this time now pawn to d4, attacking the opponent's bishop. And here the game often continues with black just capturing our pawn here now on d4 with the bishop, which is also getting attacked. We capture back with our knight from f3, and our opponent captures back with his knight too. And here we often do the short castling now, just to bring more safety for the king, bringing the rook in the center of the chessboard, on which black often plays a tactical waiting move, which is pawn to d6, defending this pawn here now on e5, and also opening up the very important diagonal for the queen's bishop here. And now we can play really lots of different moves. For example, we could play pawn to f4 with the idea that after our opponent has captured our pawn now here with the e5 pawn, we could develop our second bishop by capturing back the f4 pawn of black. The last continuation variation of the Italian game, which I would like to show you in this video, goes this time not with the Garacopiano, but rather after knight to f6 with the two knights defense. This defense is called the two knights defense because, well, black just defends himself with two knights. I think that's pretty simple. And he also attacks our pawn on e4. The option to defend this pawn now with pawn to d3, the main move of the Garacopianissimo game, is possible, but actually in this position I would recommend you, especially to beginners and also a bit better chess players, to play the very crazy fried liver attack after knight to g5. If you want to learn more about this crazy attack, which leads often into a checkmate after the following moves or to definitely a better position, then feel free to check out the second video description link in the description of this YouTube video. Thank you. This was it then already with this video, in which I have shown you the most famous continuation variations of the Italian game, also including two very nice gambits. However, I've already said, check out the other continuation variation links in the description. And if you liked the video, feel free to leave a like there, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Till next time, bye!